Hello, we're going through the diagrams that I've made for clear nose 5, 7, and 9. Alright, so my base drawing here, okay, this got the skull. Looking lateral view, I've got all foramina of interest all highlighted here. So, see, it's all the colored stuff here. They also correspond to the top-down view. Okay, start with clear nose 5. Through everything, so all three divisions are here. We can start with the first one. So big body here, oops, my bad. Yeah, big body here, trigeminal ganglion, very big. There are three holes that each division goes through. This one here is the superior orbital fissure, corresponds here. That's 5, 1. After that, you got three branches here. There's lacrimal, nasociliary, and frontal. Let me just show you. Yeah, lacrimal, nasociliary, frontal. Lacrimal one goes all the way to the lacrimal gland. It's somewhere here. I'll show you later. Anyway, the lacrimal division also gives off a few branches that I haven't really labeled here, but you see this one that's going upwards. It's passing through this brown foramen. This is usually the supraorbital notch. So this is likely the supraorbital branch of the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve. Yeah, nothing much to see here. Foramen rotundum, so transmits V to the maxillary division. Goes straight into the pterygopalatine fossa. So let me just take away the labels. Pterygopalatine fossa is a really small space in between your maxilla as well as the pterygoid process of your sphenoid. So it's a bit deeper here. What you can see so far is the zygomatic bone here. Sorry, I should probably use a different color. Whatever. Make it thicker. This entire area, whatever. It's deep to this area. So when you look at someone from the side, right, you look at their face, um, really as deep as you can go before you hit the nasal cavity. That's your pterygopalatine fossa, and it will contain the pterygopalatine ganglion. So this is my representation, the purple thing here. Cranial nerve 5.2, so the maxillary nerve will put some synapses inside this pterygopalatine ganglion. There are 7 connections from the pterygopalatine fossa to everywhere else. We went through it just now already, but I'll just recap it. There are around 7. There's a connection in every direction except for anterior, because technically, the superior connection, which is this one here, towards the orbit. So this is through the inferior orbital fissure. This technically also counts as the anterior connection. Anyway, so you've got connections anteriorly, posteriorly, superiorly, inferiorly, medially, and laterally. Some are not shown here. For example, spinopalatine foramen, I have not drawn it, but it would be somewhere here. Okay, as for the posterior connections, right, there will be 3. I've only drawn 2 of them, so if I turn on the labels, right, foramen rotundum is one, and second one, pterygoid canal. It's not labeled in my cranial 5 diagram. It'll be in the cranial 7 diagram. Anyway, continuing, just take a look at the branches we have, right? So some of them are quite important. Zygomatic branch, top here. So it passes through the inferior orbital fissure and ascends upwards into the orbit. Why this will be important is because later we'll show you about the greater protrusal nerve, and the zygomatic branch is one of the nerves that it hitchhikes on. Anyway, you can take a look at the other branches that form in that area. So we've got the infraorbital, so it's pretty important. Comes out through the infraorbital foramen, very simple. Thing to note that this infraorbital nerve is quite related, quite involved in the maxillary sinus below here. So you see that it can give off branches, notably like they're called alveolar branches lah, but they go into the maxillary sinus. Okay. There are some miscellaneous branches here and there, not important. One thing cool though is that for the pterygopalatine fossa, I mentioned there's an inferior connection, and that inferior connection is here. This is going into the palatine canal. So this is, I think, called the pterygopalatine canal, and it transmits basically the lesser and greater palatine nerves. So they themselves each have their own little foramen or canal at the side of your palate. So you feel the roof of your mouth, right? On each side, there are going to be two foramen each, one for lesser. I mean, you're not supposed to feel it, lah, but theoretically it's there. Okay. So what do they do? Greater palatine will proceed below the palate. Also, they'll send branches up into the palate itself. It will also go into the maxillary sinus, so the base of it. So some brows will tell you like greater palatine can be targeted for anesthesia during dental work, but well, we aren't dentists, so whatever. Okay. As a whole, that is the maxillary nerve all set and done. Okay. Now move on to the mandibular nerve. So mandibular nerve starts here. We go through this foramen here, and that's just foramen ovale. It's the blue one, so corresponding here. Green one's lacerum, light blue is spinosum. Okay, so once everything comes through the foramen ovale, we get to split into many different branches. So uh, don't let it intimidate you. First off, we just think about get the small ones out of the way, okay? It comes down, there's only two branches that really try to go posteriorly, and that is firstly the meningeal branch. So you see it goes through foramen spinosum. It goes back into the cranial cavity. Quite stupid. Good thing to know is that the MMA also travels with into foramen spinosum. So I've illustrated it here, MMA. Next, another posterior branch that comes out lower down in the mandibular nerve is the auriculotemporal. So it's a very important nerve. Once again, it also has a relation to the MMA. See, the MMA passes between two roots, not really roots, but two divisions, I guess, of the auriculotemporal. Why this is important will also be for later when we learn about the lesser petrosal, which will hitchhike on the auriculotemporal. Anyway, that's it for the branches that move posteriorly. For the rest of the branches, right? How I like to divide it is that first division here, first division of the mandibular nerve contains the otic ganglion, very important stuff. A lot of nerves, both somatic and parasympathetic synapse here. Then the rest of the branches are all miscellaneous branches that, okay, how like the first division here will contain the branches for both tensors. So you remember that cranial nerve 5 likes to innervate muscles that have the word tensor in it. So tensor tympani and tensor veli palatini. And then you also know that cranial nerve 5 innervates the muscles of mastication, right? So you got medial pterygoid here, and then from a lower branch around here, you get the rest of the um, mastication muscles. So nothing much here. You've got the buccal nerve here. Problem is the buccal nerve doesn't do anything to the buccinator, just so whether you're confused or not. The buccinator is technically a muscle of facial expression. Therefore, it will be cranial nerve 7, not 5. Yeah. Now, the third anterior branch of the mandibular nerve is a lingual nerve. All it does is just provide the little general somatic sensation to the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. So you already know. After that, this is where it gets funky, right? So towards the bottom, you got the mandibular foramen. Before the mandibular foramen, you got the mylohyoid muscle. So that's the only little like weirdo we have here. Other than that, the mandibular foramen is just so that you can split into the inferior alveolar nerves. These are the ones that go into like the bones, the teeth, all that. Yeah. Before we end off with we end off the mandibular section, right? Just know that later the lingual nerve will also be important because the chorda tympani hitchhikes here. I'll show you how all the hitchhiking works later towards the end. Okay, so this is the overall view of what goes on in cranial nerve 5. Now we can move on to cranial nerve 7. This one's a bit different. The nerves here are, I call them red. Don't confuse them with the ECA and axillary artery. They also color red, but they got a black outline. Okay, a bit different. We'll just start with tracing the origin. So what I haven't drawn here is of course the brainstem. So the brainstem, the cranial 7 comes out at the level of pons, so this should be around the pons area. This dark gray foramen is the internal acoustic meatus. See, this one here. Next, splits into two divisions, not important for you to know, just that when they combine together, they form the geniculate ganglion that exists somewhere posterior superiorly to your middle ear. So your middle ear, something around here. Yeah. Important first little branch that they make is this one here. It's called the greater protrusor. So what happens is that in the middle ear cavity, in the walls of the middle ear, the greater protrusor just simply pierces through all of it and it re-enters the cranial cavity. So where this arrow, like where this part that I labeled with the arrow is, it's basically running on the petrous temporal bone. So if I were to draw like the peak of the petrous temporal bone, the greater protrusor will just come out here and run anteriorly. So you look at complete anatomy and some textbooks, right? They'll show you that there's a landmark called the groove for the greater protrusor nerve. Yeah. So that's inside of the cavity on the surface of the petrous temporal bone. Pretty cool. Next, we go forward until we reach this dark green foramen. This is supposed to be foramen lacerum. Yeah, as indicated here. That's when the greater protrusor nerve enters and sticks to the anterior side of that foramen and enters this brown area here. This is the pterygoid canal. Pterygoid canal opens into the anterior of the foramen lacerum-ish surface. Yeah. So then, remember the pink ganglion that I drew? So this is the pterygopalatine ganglion. Once again, this is where your greater protrusor is going to synapse and then give off the postganglionic parasympathetic innervation to the lacrimal gland mostly. Yeah, see here. But also there are other mucous glands that are going to get innervated. So that's why, interestingly, there's a branch that comes out through the infraorbital branch. So just now we talked about greater protrusor hitchhiking. So first off, we see synapses in the pterygopalatine ganglion. This is important. So the postganglionic branches go up the maxillary nerve. See, this is the maxillary nerve. Goes up, and then once we hit the inferior orbital fissure, just now which we covered, it then ascends up the zygomatic branch. So see, I'm going to turn on the cranial 5 labels, zygomatic branch. And then goes up. This is where a little bit of variation occurs, but usually there is a communication between the zygomatic branch and the lacrimal branch of cranial 5.1. Anyway, it ultimately travels up to hitchhike on the lacrimal nerve and then goes to the lacrimal gland. Very easy, providing parasympathetic innervation. Something I don't really draw here, but to take note of is that in the pterygoid canal, so here, the greater protrusor also meets with another nerve called the deep protrusor. This one comes from the internal carotid plexus, but essentially they are both counterparts of each other. Greater protrusor provides parasympathetic innervation to the lacrimal gland. The deep protrusor provides the sympathetic innervation. Yeah, you'll find it in old textbooks, but school doesn't really need you to know this, so don't worry. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled program of cranial 7. We went on a big hitchhiking on the greater protrusor nerve. So now we're back to the rest of the branches of the facial nerve. So we're going this way. We're still in the facial canal. That's in the posterior wall of the middle ear. Yeah. And first little tiny branch here is for stapedius. Very cute. Nothing much to say. Secondly, is that before it reaches the end of the facial canal, chorda tympani comes out. Chorda tympani comes out. It's quite wild because it comes out from the posterior wall of the middle ear and then hits towards the anterior wall of the middle ear. Then it pierces through the middle wall of the anterior wall of the middle ear, and then just through all connective tissue, muscles, whatever it wants to do, to finally reach the next hitchhiking victim. We see here, recognize this? This is the mandibular nerve. So V3, 5.3. Yeah, so it just goes down, 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 down to the lingual nerve. So remember the lingual nerve was cranial nerve 5.3's attempt to hit the tongue. So similarly, chorda tympani goes to the tongue. It follows 5.3. Interestingly, this is a schematic representation of the parasympathetic ganglia. So both like somatic and efferent. So what happens is that chorda tympani synapses, some of the nerve fibers in chorda tympani synapse in these ganglia. So technically, the ganglia are supposed to be specific to the effector organ. So there should be a submandibular ganglion, a sublingual ganglion, but I only chose to draw one to keep things simple. Anyway, then you have the postganglionic parasympathetic nerves coming out from those ganglions to their effector organs. Very simple. At the same time, chorda tympani will also give the taste sensation to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So you see these red fibers here? Yeah, these are the taste ones. So chorda tympani is for both gland secretion as well as taste. So overall, right, facial nerve, it will have parasympathetic efference to all of the mucous glands in the head except for parotid gland. Yeah. So that's the only exception. Just that you need to know the distribution, all right? So lacrimal gland and some of the glands, mucous glands like towards the top of your head, right? This is greater petrosal nerve. For the taste and salivary glands, you got chorda tympani. Very cool. Okay, let me erase this. Okay, now we have the last part of the facial nerve. So this is probably the ones that you guys understand the best. Purple color foramen, I mean that's kind of like maroon, sorry. It's your stylomastoid foramen. So this is your mastoid process, this little bump that I drew. Next, what comes out of it, facial nerve, obviously. First, it gives out a few branches, but they are quite miscellaneous, and I can show you the names. Sorry, where are the names? I guess I didn't put it, but it's like posterior auricular, some shit. Yeah, not too important. Some of them go to the ear. Anyway, so you can recognize the rest of them head to the parotid gland. Once they enter the parotid gland, they split up into terminal 5 branches. So if you haven't heard already, the very sexy mnemonic is 2 zebras bit my cock. So temporal, zygomatic, buccal, marginal mandibular, and cervical. So I tried to draw them as accurately, but honestly, where each branch goes doesn't really matter. Just know that they all innervate little muscles of facial expression. So, for example, like the cervical one would probably innervate the platysma. Yeah, cool stuff. And to note this, the buccal division of the cranial nerve 7 is the one that provides motor innervation to the buccinator. All right. Okay. That's all for cranial nerve 7. Getting to the end, now we have cranial nerve 9. So I chose to not do too much of the details of cranial nerve 9 because when it goes down into the pharynx, right? Sorry. When it goes down into the pharynx, it gets real complicated, all the pharyngeal plexus and whatnot. So I chose to only do some significant branches. I'll just label them. I'll put the labels out full on first. Okay, start off at the medulla. That's where the cranial nerve 9 comes out, yeah. Then it enters the jugular foramen. It's this yellow foramen corresponding here. Okay, after it comes out, it creates 2 ganglia, so the superior and inferior ganglia. From the inferior ganglia, this is where our star player comes out, the lesser petrosal. But actually, it doesn't come out as lesser petrosal yet. First, it comes out as the tympanic nerve. So how you visualize this is actually the tympanic nerve is going to pierce the bones that lead to the middle ear. So when it does enter the middle ear, it will become the tympanic plexus. So this little net-shaped thing that I drew here is supposed to represent the tympanic plexus that is resting on top of that is resting on the surface of the oval window, yeah, in the middle ear. Look at the middle ear diagrams that I have in the slides. Anyway, next one branch of the tympanic plexus then becomes the lesser protrosal. So the stupid thing is that this lesser protrosal nerve doesn't want to just stay in the middle ear. It wants to go back into the cranial cavity. So it will pierce upwards, which I didn't really manage to illustrate it here, but it just does whatever it wants. And similarly to the greater protrosal nerve, right, it has its own groove along the surface of the petrous temporal bone. So crawl, anterior, unlike the greater protrosal, it doesn't go into the lacerum. What it does go into is the foramen ovale. Very cool. So now you know how cranial nerves, like even though you're taught that they exit in a particular foramen, right? Some of their branches can also exit the cranial nerve in some other way, just that they have to first re-enter the cranial nerve. Okay. So from foramen ovale, the lesser protrosal will eventually reach the otic ganglion. The otic ganglion exists in the infratemporal fossa, and the infratemporal fossa is lateral to the pterygopalatine fossa. So if I bring back up cranial nerve 5, right, the purple ganglion, the pterygopalatine fossa. So this is supposed to be more lateral to the pterygopalatine fossa. Okay. Taking away the cranial nerve 5 stuff, we go back to cranial nerve 9. The postganglionic fibers that carry parasympathetic innervation to the parietic gland, they go from the otic ganglion straight to the parietic gland. But how do they get there? You gotta do some hitchhiking. So once again, cranial nerve 5 is the victim here. It's also the same victim as chorda tympani, which is the mandibular division. So you go from the otic ganglion, it reaches hitchhikes through the mandibular nerve, but importantly, right, so just now we talked about auriculotemporal. Here it is again, being hitchhiked on. So it's quite important. Yeah. So Bros will emphasize like the relation of auriculotemporal to the middle meningeal, as well as the fact that because as well as the fact that the lesser protrosal hitchhikes through it. Yeah. And all of this is in the vicinity of the parietic gland. Yeah. Okay. So we are done with the first branch, just the first branch of cranial nerve 9. The rest of the branches are not very important. So stylopharyngeus is the next one. I mean, well, cranial nerve 9 only has one somatic motor innervation, and that's to the stylopharyngeus. Stylohyoid is the cranial nerve 7. And there are some more miscellaneous nerves here. I didn't want to label them because it's so unimportant. Next, so last one, this lingual branch, right, of cranial nerve 9. I know you already seen like cranial nerve 5 got one lingual branch. Cranial nerve 9 also has one too. And it takes whatever route it wants, just so it can reach the tongue. So once again, right, remember, taste and general sensation, somatic sensation of the and posterior 1/3 of the tongue is cranial nerve 9-ish, 10, whatever plexus. So whatever it is, right, around this area, cranial nerve 9 has to reach it. So there's just a really long nerve that goes to this area. Okay, so the last branch that we can want to like understand is that this is the carotid body and sinus branch. So this is the one where you do your baroreceptor reflex. ICA will be running somewhere like here. Yeah, so eventually you reach it here. Don't worry. Okay, so that has been cranial nerve 9. I hope I didn't bore you. Now we do the fun part, which is combining all 3 of these shitholes. Whoa, okay. You can still, the important parts are still where the hitchhiking occurs. So pterygopalatine fossa, otic ganglion, chorda tympani on the lingual branch of cranial nerve 5.3. Yeah. This is how it's supposed to look like overall. So yeah, it's very complex. You look at someone's face, right? So much bullshit is going on underneath it. But you can't help it. There's even more bullshit because these are only just 3 of the cranial nerves. So hopefully that helps with orientating yourself. Oops, forgot to add the ECA and MMA. Yeah, maxillary artery will just go behind the mandible, go up this way to the pterygopalatine area. Yeah, maxillary artery has a bunch of branches. Okay, that's it for the drawing. I can only send in the PDF or PNG versions of this. You can send the Procreate or I guess Photoshop file of it as well. But I know if you want me to do it, just say. Okay, that's it. Now I'll spend the time also going through complete anatomy because I think it's better if we have a demonstration. So going to complete anatomy, you get this little sexy skeleton. What you can do is that just start turning on arterial, venous, and nervous. Just a level one. Level one can already. Start dissecting away the bones. You can hide things or you can fade them. I choose to hide the brain. Already, you can already see the very nice ventricles as well as the other brain structures. This is the corpus callosum and the putamen, so parts of the limbic system as well. So you can already start to see some cranial nerves that you might want to be interested in. So this trigeminal. I'll just hide the structures that are in the way. Case will take a while, sorry. Anyway, to fade stuff, right? I find it good to fade like the temporal bone. Because you see here, right? You see the carotid canal. You can finally see the shape of it. As well as the middle ear, the internal acoustic meatus. You can see the geniculate ganglion, this little dump here. Yeah. By the way, if you want to select multiple things, right, you select one thing, then you press multiple selection on the left. Tada, gives you multiple selection. Very easy. Okay. Other features, right, I'll just show you real quick. For example, cranial 5, right, if I want to see all the branches, right, see? The moment I go into the branch section, it highlights it all in blue. If I want to make it even clearer, right, you can isolate the branches or highlight them, which will fade away everything else. Yeah, complex as hell, right? Okay, back to what we wanted to do. I think I've covered hide, fade. Okay, there is also this cool function, which you go to the library. Okay, sorry, you don't have to go to the library first. What you do is that if you like something, like a particular view that you've dissected and you want to keep it, what you do is that you go to the bottom right, it says save screen. Yeah, you type your title, description, and save it to your library. So when to access it, right, you go to your library. So I already have a few screens saved. So all I have to do is just press on them and it will load them in the exact same view and with all the organs and the bones arrange how you want it to. The only problem is that they don't highlight what you highlighted previously. Anyway, so I've created the greater petrosal cause. Geniculate ganglion is in the little internal acoustic meatus here. The anterior going branch, yeah, that's the greater petrosal. So you see it exits see how the color becomes fully yellow. It comes out of the temporal bone, goes in the groove of the greater petrosal nerve, then hits to foramen lacerum. See, that's where the ICA is also heading. And then you can take a tiny look, right? It hits anteriorly. So that's why the branches don't show up anymore. But it goes into the pterygoid canal, basically. Yeah. You can also, if you know this already, like the ICA plexus, right? It's also shown here. And there's a little division from that's joining the greater petrosal. That's your deep petrosal. So very cool. Yeah. So complete anatomy is very powerful for showing little details. I'll just bring up lesser petrosal just for because I liked it. So this is also what I put in the slides. This is the exact view. Lesser petrosal. Okay. So let me just find the lesser petrosal. Okay, I see it. I can orientate myself. It's a bit faded, but This is the tympanic plexus right in front of the blue thing. So you can tell that, you can see that these are the two ganglia for cranial nerve 9. They have this long tympanic nerve that goes up, pierces the bone into the middle ear cavity here. Then you have one division of the tympanic plexus moving up into the temporal bone, comes out in this groove over here, and then enters foramen ovale, which is where the mandibular nerve enters also. You see, all fits in, very nice. Yeah, that's about it. As for like the layers, right? You see, I'm using a layer 5, but honestly, layer 1 for everything works. Don't even know why I have the muscles turned on. Hmm. Okay, that's about it. I'm done. See you, 加油.